Paul Stonehill back on the program, international researcher and author. Areas of research and published works include UFOs and these USOs, again, the unidentified submersible objects, Soviet space exploration, Eurasian paranormal phenomenon. Now, back in October of 1993, Omni Magazine featured a story about Paul and his work, and that research center that he had created back in 91, which was the Russian Ufology Research Center. His areas of expertise are definitely Russian history, Soviet covert operations, and so much more. And, Paul, I want to talk with you about so many other things tonight as well. I'm glad you're with us. Welcome to the program.
Thank you. Thank you for having me back.
Paul, I want to get your reaction on the sanctions against Russia. We've got many other things to talk about, but you are an expert on Russia and the Soviet Union. Is it justified in your opinion? I mean, the Senate has overwhelmingly voted for it, and today the president signed it. What do you think?
Well, I think that instead of getting together and working together openly on a number of projects, we're going more and more apart. And this is sad because every time we, like, for example, Soviet Union and the United States come together, like during the Antarctica time, late 1970s, something happens and we have to go apart. Russia invades lands that should not belong to them, and all hell breaks out. And I'm sorry to see it happen because Russia is not the Soviet Union. It's a different state, yet they still pursue imperial policies that I think are hurting the Russian people. And, that's all I want to talk about for Russian politics. I hope they will go on the path to freedom and definitely develop lands that will create better future for Russia, Siberia, Far East. So much is happening there.
I know. It's just incredible. And there's just so many tense things out there, Paul, and with North Korea doing what they're doing, now's not the time to become an enemy of Russia right now. We need them as an ally.
I agree. And you know what? At another level, at a much higher level, we work together. For example, I posted not long ago information about sanctions not at all having any effect on the space exploration programs. We will continue to share information, and that's how it should be. On other levels, in my field of research, I feel that their cooperation never stopped. In the darkest days of the Soviet Union, it continued hand in hand. And it still does today. And, although we see a lot of news items and reports about one, problem here, another hot spot here, other place, at the same time, I can see that even the military forces of our nations and China work together, conduct military training exercises, pull together in sensitive areas where I think we're facing another adversary. The Arctic, Mariana Trench, some other areas of the world where things are happening where we have to react. And it's not us against the Americans or us against the Russians.
Paul, tell us now as we get into this incredible area that you've got your expertise in, and that's UFO cases in Russia. How did you key in on Russia for these UFO cases, or why?
Well, why? Because, first of all, for many years I've been interested in the subject, even when I was a citizen of the Soviet Union, and the subject was a forbidden one because we were not supposed to be talking about UFOs in the Soviet Union. At the same time, the government was doing its best to study what's going on. And after I left the Soviet Union, to the best of my abilities, sometimes not openly legal from the Soviet point of view, I stayed in touch with Soviet ufologists and those interested. And the best time came at the end of 1980s. Things were happening, and Gorbachev has to be applauded for that. We got out so much information from the Soviet Union. I was able to establish contacts with many research groups openly, so they wouldn't suffer because they know me, for example. and wealth of information came out until, I would say, middle 1990s. And you could find out that, the Soviet Union was involved in unprecedented UFO and USO research program where every member of the armed forces had to report to their commanders if they see something unusual in the sky or in the waters or on land. This was unprecedented. And we also found out that the U.S. and NATO and the Russians were facing basically the same, I don't want to say adversary, but the same entity or entities they couldn't understand. This happened, for example, with the so-called quackery or crocus phenomena, when they encountered gigantic objects at the bottom of the oceans or at the great depths. And these were no Americans, and Americans thought they were encountering Russian technology, but couldn't. So, but what I want to always bring forth is that the Soviets and the American scientists at high levels were working together. For example, late 1970s, and even before. And I'm also telling you something I just found out, for example, because I keep an eye on what's going on a daily basis. Just a few days ago, by the island of Matua that I've discussed before, it's in the Coral Islands. Very unusual little island, now completely taken over by the Russian military and scientists, sealed off. They're doing research.
And the big question is, what are they doing there, right?
I'll tell you. They found, what they're doing, we're not sure exactly, but here's what they did. They found a cigar-shaped object that has been determined to be a submarine. 99% they say it's a submarine. It's either the American submarine that was sunk off the island or the Japanese. But we're not learning everything they're finding yet. I hope we will, because that island contains a lot of secrets. And it could be, nuclear weapons development or something that the Nazi Germany was hiding, because they had expeditions to the island well after the end of World War II and before Japan surrendered. And that area is a hot area itself. I understand North Korea is of interest to a lot of people, and it's not too far away in the Sea of Okhotsk and the Coral Islands. There's a lot of UFO and USO activity there, especially during volcanic activity and so forth. And the Russians know that something is going on. The Americans knew something was out there because Truman offered Stalin to give up that island in exchange for something, but Stalin had a very steep price. So back so many years ago, they knew that those areas were of interest, just like they knew about the Arctic Ocean. Look at the Arctic Ocean today. There's a lot of talk that, the Russians and the Americans and the Canadians are facing each other in the Arctic. I think it's more of cooperation that's happening. But Russia has to bring up their forces to the Arctic Ocean. They say it's to defend their territorial claims or, natural resources and so forth. But I'll tell you, from my research, from the information I have from the official Soviet sources, there's been a wave of UFO activity and USO in that area. There was a gigantic wave in 1979, very important year, of UFOs over the Arctic areas. And in later years, the head of the Russian, before Soviet, now Russian expedition to the Lake Vostok and other areas, who is in charge of the Arctic and Antarctic expeditions, Vladimir Lukin, he himself in 1984 observed the UFOs in the area. And he wasn't afraid to talk about it. He openly stated what they had encountered in 1984. So you have less, I find that sometimes in Russia they have less inhibition to speak about UFOs and USOs at high and credible levels.
Paul, I've got to ask you, too, earlier you had said that the Soviet government did not want anybody, their citizens, talking about these cases. while they were studying them, clandestinely. Why was that? Why didn't they want you to be forthright about this?
Well, two things. If we're on a more simplistic level, they wanted to describe everything to be bourgeois invention, and the Soviet people don't believe it. On a more credible and cynical level, they knew that the ufologists, such as Felix Ziegel, were observing things in the sky that they shouldn't be, because the Soviets were conducting military tests. And if we are to be straightforward, let's say that 95%, let's give them this, of UFO sightings are secret military tests or natural phenomena, we're not sure about.
Mm-hmm.
But 5%, I believe that's what the Soviet Academy of Sciences also claimed, 5% cannot be explained. And first of all, the Soviet government did not want any competition from the independent researchers. That's not how things worked in the Soviet Union. And they also knew that the CIA was very much involved in spying after people like Felix Ziegel to get any crumb of information they could. But when you study the history of Soviet ufology, you find out that, for example, the Central Intelligence Agency was very active in the Soviet Union in 1947. Very memorable year.
It sure was. That was our Roswell year here in the United States.
Yeah, but at the same time, if you remember, this was the year of the Antarctic expedition, Robert Byrd, and a few other events around the world. And trust me, and the Soviets had experienced their UFOs well before as well, and during that time. Well, in 1947, the CIA was very much interested about reports from the field agents of UFOs flying over Uzbekistan. Uzbekistan, to me, this is an area of interest because of the earthquakes and everything associated with it. So when I started studying that area, I found out that, yes, in 1947, the CIA was very active there, I'm sure, later. And under Stalin's Russia, it wasn't that easy to have foreign agents inside your country, but they did. And also I found out that in 1966, for example, when there was a horrible earthquake in the city of Tashkent that basically destroyed it, in the few days of late April of that year, we also had a wave of UFOs still unexplained over the United States, Atlantic seaboard, and other areas. So I started prodding more and more. And I found out that the governor of Florida, his airplane was chased by UFOs exactly, about the same time. There was a volcanic event in Indonesia and a few things in Australia, approximately in the same time frame. And then, I found out that, the future president of the United States, Gerald Ford, was so much incensed in 1966 by his constituents constantly berating him about UFOs over their state that he demanded hearings about UFO presence in the United States.
Yeah.
Not many people remember it.
I was in that state at the time. That was Michigan. And that was a wild time. I think during that time period, J. Allen Hynek showed up, and that's where that swamp gas theory of his came that followed him for the rest of his career.
You see? But to me, the impetus was the events in Uzbekistan, in Tashkent, where they had UFOs all over the place. Now, I'm not sure what UFOs were attracted to the earthquake situation to observe, or something else happened. But again, this is an area of many secrets, Uzbekistan. Ancient cities lying under the sands, and I have described in my video presentation, because very few people have seen it. And those who see the pictures and images, they become astounded. For example, there's a city, ancient city in Uzbekistan, circular city. You don't see too many of those. But you do see a city like that in southern Russia. What's today southern Russia? In the Ural Mountains, I should say, southern Ural Mountains. It's called the city of Arkaim. Some long-gone civilization invented a city which is an observatory in itself. and who knows, the knowledge that they possess disappeared. The same happened in Uzbekistan. So when you start following, the former Soviet Union is a very big piece of land. And trust me, most of the paranormal phenomena has not been explored to the fullest, especially UFOs and USOs.
Is China also getting many kinds of UFO reports?
Yeah, and I'm glad you asked, because we almost get nothing about China. So I try to fill in as much as I can, but my information comes from the Russian sources. And they have to know what's going on in China, because they're neighbors. China is very much involved. They have a different level of government involvement. The government sponsors UFO research groups. They have government-level teams. They take, to them, it's science. There is no question that UFOs are there, or, they have different hypotheses where they come from. But for thousands of years, China has experienced UFO activity, and one of their famous emperors himself was most likely an alien, the Yellow Emperor. And so China takes it very seriously. My area of interest was Sichuan province, and just one province, but it's close to Tibet, and it's had so many things. And as time goes by, there are dynamic archaeological discoveries in the area as well. But they also had, in the late 1970s and 1981, unusual UFO sightings. And Chinese scientists from the famous and renowned Purple Observatory had studied it. And that observatory, I urge your listeners to keep an eye on any news that comes from that place, because for at least, I would say, more than 60 years, things have been involved. And they exchange information with Russian experts that I greatly admire, like Ivan Yefremov, who was able to come to China in 1959 and received an ancient globe made, who knows from what metal, that, had continents which people should not be knowing about 5,000 years ago when it was made. That's just one of the interesting things. I know the Chinese were very much interested in the Dalnygorsk case. I discussed it before a few times, but the famous 1986 case from a forbidden area of the Soviet Union, a small settlement where they find strategic metals and explore them, excavate them, whatever you call it. And this was a very famous case. Some call it the Roswell of Russia. The Chinese were interested. They wanted to know what's going on.
The military was all over that one, were they not?
Well, I tell you, if they were, we don't know too much about. They were very quick and deadly, because nobody knows. The person who was one of the first, Dr. Jimmy, passed away a few years ago. He was very active. I have his original, handwritten report about the area and the strange findings of the metals that they had.
All right. Well, hold on, Paul. We're going to take this quick break, and then we're going to come right back. Paul Stonehill, our special guest. A couple of his books include Russia's USO Secrets. Those, again, are unidentified submersible objects, which I want to get into. Russian Roswell Incident, UFO Case Files of Russia. We're going to try to get a better connection with Paul, too. It sounds a little muddy to me back here, and I'm sure you, too. So we'll see if we can tighten that up a little bit, and we will be back. And welcome back. Paul Stonehill with us, international researcher and author. We're talking about the Russian UFO cases. Paul, the government of Russia now, do you think they will ever disclose to the public that this has been going on?
No, that would go against everything that they stand for. There is no reason to disclose. It's a state secret. And, what would the Russian population do? What good would it do for the people? It's a different mindset. But at the same time, they cannot disclose information. For example, USOs, there was a lot of noise in 2009 that they had declassified their files. They can't do it, and they said it openly, because this way the adversary will find out about their submarine operations and routes, which they take. So no, I don't believe this will happen. There is no reason. What would Putin gain from it?
Right. That's a good point. We have heard, let's go back to Antarctica for a second as we talk about some of these various cases. Well, but we have heard that there is something definitely submerged down there. I don't know what, but, could it have been an ancient city? Could it have been a UFO? Could it have been an asteroid? There's something down there. What has your research shown you?
What it's shown me is that from 1946, the Soviets had been very active in Antarctica, and they gained their entry through Argentina on whaling ships. This got, but the Americans knew about it, and what's interesting is there was a case when the Soviet submarines who actually came to the area were attacked on their way from Antarctica. But it wasn't the Americans who attacked them, and vice versa. They actually, both sides cooperated, and the Soviets received from the Americans part of the Antarctica in the east called the Bunker Hills area, and that's not too far away from Lake Vostok and a few other stations.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a very interesting, definitely exchange of information and territories. And I also found through the Russian newspapers how Australia, the military forces of Australia, very active in West Antarctica, discovered facilities at the bottom of the ocean and some of the USO type ships moving about too. So that was very interesting because I never read anything like that in the United States or anywhere else. So information comes out. There are things that are happening in Lake Vostok, and I have a way to find out more or less on a daily basis what's going on. But they're not stupid. Those who study the situation, they don't want people to find out. So everything is shut down. And again, there's definite exchange between the Americans, the Chinese, and I think India is now in on the game as well. Everybody around the world is trying to get into Antarctica.
Now, I'm not asking you to reveal your sources, Paul, but do you trust them? Do you have faith in what they tell you?
It's not even what they tell me. It's how you get, I know how to get information from the scientists who are, their sources of information who are in Antarctica on a daily basis. Some of them talk a lot. Now, we can say that this is all concealment. That could be true. Then the question is, who is using so much efforts to conceal what's going on in Antarctica that they would create false news and spread all over the world? So either way, something is going on in Antarctica. But more than that, I'll give you two interesting cases.
Okay.
And I put them on in my YouTube channel too. One was about in the 1979. Again, 1979. Case when Soviet aircraft was basically spinned out and should I say banged by a UFO that was rising up into the air, and people died. One of the survivors never knew what happened until years later when he met other people who were on site on the Soviet station and told him that there was a UFO that was rising up into the air, just like when your airplane was taking off. And that spinned you guys, and your airplane dived, and basically people died. This was in 1979. He came to the office of a major newspaper. He didn't care anymore. He wasn't well, and he presented all the details, his name, when it happened, aircraft, and so forth. And he was, by the way, taken to New Zealand for treatment, so this is not a made-up case. Another one was very interesting. There was an article in a Siberian newspaper by someone who was very much interested in the whole situation because he had observed USOs too. And his friend who worked for the KGB told him that, look, we intercepted a conversation from a Soviet expeditionary ship, scientific ship,
mm-hmm.
and the objects they observed down by Antarctica in the waters. Now, they intercepted it because they wanted to know who else is listening and just to hear in other scientists. I always say that the KGB was not primarily interested in UFO research, but they had to pay some attention to it. And so this was another very interesting case because also names were provided and dates. And so you glean pieces of information, not a full picture, but at least some fragments of what's going on.
Now, the Russians that have been investigating these cases, have they released to you, the scientists, where they think the crafts might be coming from?
Oh no, they won't release anything to me. Directly, there are the great scientists I worked with, for example, Professor Budakov passed away. The new guys, I have colleagues in Russia. I have great UFO researchers, such as Mikhail Gerstein, who has excellent connections. And I find out information on my own, if not from my sources.
Mm-hmm. One
of the best sources I had and others passed away, Vadim Chernobrov, a few months ago, and he was a young man, but very active. He was the head of the Kosmopoisk research group, and I always wanted him to be able to one day to come and speak to you or, people of your caliber in the United States. He was so active, he created UFO research groups all over the world and led expeditions to the Tunguska site and a few other interesting sites. Well, he passed away. So, I work with other people as well. But there are ways to find out what's going on a daily basis, even at Lake Vostok and other stations around Russia. It's, for example, in the Arctic areas and Antarctic. And that's where I get a lot of my information. I also monitor media and receive stuff on a daily basis from the former Soviet Union, not only Russia.
You have no doubts, Paul, that something is happening, something extraordinary, I take it.
Yes. And, the more, the scientists explore Antarctica, the more we will find out. Even just sheer scientific discoveries like 2 days ago, I found out that there are microbes that they found in Antarctica because of the melting, they say, that could actually help with the so-called global warming by eating methane gas. In itself, it's a great discovery. It has nothing to do with UFOs, but gives you hope for tomorrow, and less BS about all this situation. But as to the UFOs and USOs, yes, I have no doubt something is happening. And in my books, I present information, photographs from the Soviet submarines and other vessels that were in the area of Antarctica or South Georgia Island. Always remember that territory. It's a British territory where things are happening.
Where,
the British are not like that.
And I know this may be just pure speculation, but where might these craft be coming from?
Recently, we found out that there is another ocean under the mantle, the Earth's crust. There's a gigantic ocean down below that we never knew about. Okay, so we're finding things we have no idea existed. In my opinion, I believe, just like Hermann Oberth did, the father on the German side of the space science, that they're extraterrestrials.
Other planetary systems, probably.
That's my belief. I've always had it. But it doesn't exclude me from listening to other sources. And I'm very interested in the theory of the tunnels, ancient tunnel system around the planet.
Mm-hmm.
And who knows what civilization is down there. But I pay attention to what's going on in the Urals, in Siberia, Lake Baikal, in the Chinese Tian Shan Mountains and other areas. And there seem to be definite confirmation that there are ancient tunnels. Not long ago, this is something I need to do. I found out information about Soviets trying to build a tunnel from Sakhalin Island, and they found out actually that there was a much more ancient structure down below. It was in Stalin's time. And the cost was prohibitive, and I guess they found something else because they decided not to proceed with the project. And there are names of the scientists who were involved, no longer alive, but, they put their names down. So you find out things like that. Something else. Look, we just found out not long ago that by the area of Madagascar and between Madagascar and India, there was an ancient continent, which the scientists just came up with this idea. Well, how relevant it is, how interesting. Well, the Indian Ocean is full of UFO and UFO secrets. We don't have too many reports, but from what we have, it's incredible. I'm working on something that has to do with the area of Madagascar, or around that area, more or less, because I was in Africa many years ago, and I've spoken to people and collected information, and now I see that what I've collected and I have is being confirmed. Nobody pays attention to that part of the world, but we should, because although we don't have too many sightings, there have been very interesting ones, like in Madagascar in 1954. The French government has classified and had done their own research about it.
Yeah.
200,000 people saw it.
Paul, has anybody seen occupants in these craft?
There are a lot of rumors, and I don't believe that it's that level of civilization that we would be able to see anything like that or to touch. If they're much more developed than we are, I think their biological shape would be different. They would not be constrained by, temporary biological form. I think what we have is probably robotic entities, and we can talk about it later.
Yeah.
I think the closest the Soviets had come was the 1987 case in Monchegorsk, and I think Gorbachev knows quite a lot about it. This was part of the Setka program information, the secret program I told you about, UFO research, when an object, a small shuttle-like object, appeared in northern Russia and was taken to a military research station for such projects, and they studied it, and they couldn't get in, so they had to break their way in, and what they found inside was something that was created for people of much smaller height.
That's right.
The technology was not understood, and the object either exploded or disappeared from the hangar where it was taken to. Now, in 1987, Gorbachev, on his way to another town, changed his itinerary and went to Monchegorsk, obviously to observe this. And I wish I could speak to him to find out what he knows, if he could tell us.
Would he be open to telling us?
I think something is holding them back. I'll give you a better example than him, who couldn't say everything he knew, but said enough for volumes of UFO research. The Ukrainian cosmonaut, Soviet Ukrainian cosmonaut Pavel Popovich, he was an incredible person who created ways for Russian ufologists to continue their research. He was their protection, krysha, like we say in Russian. He was their roof over their heads. And he also pushed UFO research, and he observed UFO over Cuba when flying to the United States in 1970s. He revealed information about underwater bases, which is very close to what I found out from other research. And one of them, he said, this is what he said, there are some remaining bases. The one in the Andes Mountains, he said, we came too close to it, so it shut down. Who is we? I have no idea. And what he meant by Andes Mountains, probably one of the lakes. The Indian Ocean base is active. He mentioned that, and of course the one in the Pacific Ocean. But the Indian Ocean is the one that intrigued me. He spoke to a Ukrainian newspaper, I believe it's 2006, about that time. The Soviet Union was gone many years before. He spoke to a Ukrainian newspaper, and he lives in Russia. He has nothing to do with the Soviet Union. But he said, I gave my oath of secrecy to the Soviet Union, and I cannot say any more. So, like Gorbachev, they keep their oath. I don't think it's to the old Soviet Union, but to something. And they say they cannot reveal the information.
Well, and we're doing the same thing here, Paul, in the United States. We're just not getting the information we need, and if it wasn't for people like you and others who dig for it, we'd never find out what was going on.
Thank you.
Paul, we're going to take a quick break. We're going to come back and take phone calls with you, and we'll talk more about your work, Russia's USO secrets. These are these unidentified submersible objects. I want to get more into that and get your thoughts on why they are under the water, what they're doing down there. Maybe they use the ocean water as a power source.